My name's Ethan, and I'm the president of SCARF.
Hello, everyone, and I'm Kuba, and I'm one of the co-directors of CIA. Welcome to our first collaboration event. This is the first time CIA has ever collaborated, and that too with SCARF. And we thought it would be a great opportunity for science and faith to come together in various different traditions. So we're excited to say that this event is online and in person, so you are able to join in any way you feel comfortable. And we have panelists with us from the Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist background, and they will be speaking to how their faith shaped their background in science.
I think someone said they couldn't see the video.
Oh,
yeah. I think you can, you're sharing your screen.
yeah.
So they
Should
can
we share?
Maybe.
No, I just think it goes small.
Okay, yeah, it's just goes small. Okay.
Okay,
That's
we keep going. Okay, well, we're just gonna keep going, and hopefully after we get through our whole PowerPoint, you will be able to actually see us as well. So thank you for your patience. So for our online audience, we just ask that, as normal with video calls with many people, just please be sure to keep yourself muted unless you're talking. That just keeps all the noise that can come through to a minimum. And for those in person, thank you for finding your appropriate seats in a socially distanced manner. Obviously, you guys know the drill here at Kelvin. We ask that you keep your masks on, follow COVID guidelines. If you need to step out to get a drink, you are welcome to do so. And we will also have a person online, thank you guys, who will be taking questions at the end of the discussion. So for both people who are in person and online, feel free to raise your hand in the Teams feature, raise your hand in person, or put any questions that you have in the chat, or you can email it to cia@calvin.edu. So we just want to remind you that this is a safe space to ask any questions that you may have, but we ask that you be respectful while engaging in any of the discussions. And lastly, we will be recording this on Teams, so if you have anyone that you would want to share this with, we welcome you to do so. I think it's a great opportunity to get this information out there to the public.
Hello, my name is Bee, and I will be introducing our speakers. I'm the marketing intern. So joining us online is Leena Kariapper. She is a PhD candidate at the Van Andel Institute in Molecular and Cellular Biology. She is from a Muslim background and will be sharing that perspective. She was born in Sri Lanka and raised in Saudi Arabia. Next, we have our in-person Professor Loren Haarsma from the physics department at Calvin. He has earned his PhD in physics from Harvard and has been teaching at Calvin for over 20 years. He is a member of the Neelan CRC in Grand Rapids. And finally, we have Yong Su joining us online. He is a soon-to-be ordained Buddhist monk in the Grand Rapids Buddhist Temple. He has established his scientific routes with 3 companies in the Silicon Valley: Spectra Physics, Varian, and Siemens.
Hello, my name is Dane Hubers, and I am on the leadership for SCARF. Thank you again to our speakers for joining us here today, and thank you for everyone who came here to join us in this discussion. So we have a few questions that we have planned beforehand to kind of help guide us through this discussion. And the first of which is, how does your faith view the intersection of science and faith? Have the two been in conflict with each other? Professor Haarsma, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks for your excellent questions, and thanks for the opportunity to share the virtual stage with members of other faith traditions where we can talk and learn from each other. So starting out sort of generally, the Christian tradition has often tended to see science as a tool for learning about God's really amazing creation. And that's probably the primary motivation for developing science is learning about what God has made. But of course, we also learned very quickly that science is a tool for improving our technology and our medicine. And as such, it provides us tools to serve and love other people and to be better stewards of creation. Now, like all tools, human beings can misuse it and use it for bad purposes. So that's where wisdom and good thinking and virtue and good theology comes in to use those tools wisely. In terms of conflict, I know you have some later questions about tensions and conflicts, so I'll just be very broad here. Most of the things which at first glance seem to be a conflict between science and religion tend to actually fall in two categories. They are sort of internal conflicts within the Christian tradition, different theological ideas about how we should use science on some issue. For example, how do we use what science tells us about natural history and our interpretation of Genesis? There's sort of an internal debate within Christian theology on that. Right now, there's lots of Christians who strongly urge using everything we learn about science to get people vaccinated against COVID as fast as possible. But there is a minority of voices within the Christian tradition who are resistant to that. So that's it. It may look like a conflict between science and religion, but it's more of an internal discussion within Christianity. There's another source of conflict sometimes that might look like science versus religion, but it's actually more of a discussion among an atheistic worldview and religion. So not all, but a few atheists will use science and say that science proves that belief in God is irrational. And then sometimes Christian believers will respond by saying, well, I guess nearly and falsely saying that nearly all scientists are out to disprove religion. So that's not really science versus religion. That's more of a worldview debate between atheism and theism. So that's how most of the conflicts look, but we'll get into some more details later. That's enough for now.
Thank you very much. Leena, would you like to speak to that question as well?
Actually, there's a bit of feedback.
Thank you. I'll mute myself.
So my views on how Islam, which is the religion Muslims follow, and science intersect is very, very similar to what has already been said. It's Dr. Hauskamp, right? Yeah, so it's very interesting to actually have this conversation. And like I said, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. And it's really nice to represent being a Muslim scientist on this panel. And yeah, we also have internal conflicts between people who follow the religion, mainly because when you read the literature, you start interpreting it in your own different ways. So I see that's where the conflict arises from. But in general, many places in the Quran strongly encourage that we seek knowledge, and it's exactly the same. Seek knowledge to understand the world that's been created, seek knowledge to understand the creations that God has bestowed on this world. So it's exactly the same view. And from a personal point of view, I think there is a lot of mercy. At least that's one of the biggest principles in Islam, a lot of mercy in the way we are allowed to view the way religion meets science. But, and I think that as long as you are using science to be a better person and the other way around, you are doing and practicing your science, being integral and also being honest about your work, I don't see how they really conflict with each other. It's really how you use your understanding. That's
Thank
all.
you very much. Yeah. Reverend Yong Su, would you like to speak to that question as well? I think you're still muted still. Would you be able to?
I see. I'm used to Zoom. I have to look at new places for mutes. I was just informed that I was going to do this a couple hours ago, so I don't have a lot of prepared something to speak to. But so far, I wouldn't argue with anything I've heard. In Buddhism, we say, some of us say, that we use the scientific method. And what we mean by that is, when I was a Quaker before I became a Buddhist, and I had some friends that were attending the Grand Rapids Buddhist Temple, and after talking with them a while, I thought, I really want to give this a try. I really want to do an experiment, is exactly what I said. So I talked to the teacher at the temple, and I said, I want to do a 90-day experiment to see if this has something for me, because I feel I need some more direction in my life. He gave me a couple of assignments, and I did them for 90 days, and my life definitely improved. The whole message of Buddhism is all about suffering. There are many, many scriptures in Buddhism, and all of them Buddha taught in one way or another about suffering. What is it? How is it caused? How do we nurture it? And how do we get free from it? So the Dalai Lama says it much better than me about science. He says, suppose that something is definitely proven through scientific investigation. Suppose that that fact is incompatible with Buddhist theory. There is no doubt that we must accept the result of the scientific research. So Buddha put out some things and said, see if this works. See if it relieves your suffering. Buddhism isn't for everybody on the planet. We respect all religions and do not put any down. But for us, if that experiment works, then there's something there. If it doesn't, then we say, please find something that will relieve your suffering. If we can't, hopefully something in the world will. That's it.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you for agreeing or for being willing to join us even on such short notice. It is really appreciated. So our second question is, how do you personally see your faith interacting with science, and kind of how do they shape each other and kind of have more of a personal interaction directing one another? Professor Haarsma, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you. So for me personally, I feel like God has affirmed, in Christian tradition, we sometimes call it a calling, a call to do science and to teach science. And I feel like this is a way that I can serve God and serve God's people and people all over the world. So that's one very positive way within my own personal life. It's part of how I am faithful to God is by being a good scientist and a good science teacher. I find that Christian theology helps me have a basis for understanding why science works. Within the Christian tradition, we say that the reason there's regular, repeatable patterns of cause and effect is because that's how God chooses to govern the world. So theology gives me a basis for why science works. And theology gives me a way of interpreting results of science. So, for example, what is a natural law? An atheist might answer one way. Perhaps a Buddhist will answer another way. The way in my tradition I interpret what is it. Scientists of every religious tradition agrees there are these things we call natural laws, which are nice descriptions of how the world works. I see them as ways that God chooses to govern in a faithful and consistent way rather than capriciously. In science, we learn that there's events which we describe by randomness and chance. And within the Christian tradition, I don't see that as an absence of God. I see that as one way that God might sometimes choose one event over another in ways that are beyond our understanding. And perhaps it's a way God gives limited freedom to the world as sort of an act of love. There are other things we discover, like we learn from thermodynamics and physics about the eventual heat death of the universe. Now that's something we can learn about through science, that long into the future, sort of all energy processes will run out to maximum entropy. How do you interpret that within each tradition? Well, the Christian tradition gives me a very hopeful and not pessimistic way to interpret that scientific result. And there are some ways that science influences my life of faith and my theology too. A lot of Christians talk about what we learn in science can amplify some things we learned about God from studying Scripture. We learn about God's nature from studying Scripture, and sometimes what we learn in science can illuminate and amplify that. And sometimes, and this is where it can get interesting, things I learn in science might prompt me to re-examine an interpretation of Scripture that maybe I learned 20 or 30, 40 years ago, and say, well, maybe that isn't the best interpretation. And occasionally through my life, that's happened, that science has sort of prompted me to say, hey, look at that again.
Thank you very much. Leena, would you like to speak to that question as well?
Sure. I would say, I guess I'll use an example. So this is the month of Ramadan. It's the month that Muslims fast in. And fasting has been a long-held tradition. And we know that there's a lot of benefits for intermittent fasting and dry fasting, which is the way we practice the fasting during this month. And I've always known since I was young that, you know, this is something we need to do. It's a religious tradition. But after like engaging in science and practicing science and actually understanding the scientific benefits of fasting, like how it boosts your immune system and how it renews the microbiome inside your body and how it helps with weight loss if you are working towards that goal. And all of these things that are really beneficial for your body kind of makes me feel stronger in my faith that what I learned in the Islamic literature has practical benefit. And as a scientist, I'm always looking for something that's more tangible and concrete. So I feel like they go hand in hand. As my work as a scientist and my attitude as a scientist strengthens my belief in Islam, and the other way around, things that have been known for thousands of years, I understand the value of it through my approach with science. I use science to understand religion and vice versa. So I think that is how the two combine in my life.
Thank you very much. Yong Su, would you like to speak to that question as well?
Sure. I think I've said before, maybe I haven't, I'm not a scientist, but I've been in and around science through my career in Silicon Valley. And the one thing that I would say that is similar or it is an inquisitive mind. And in Buddhism, we say beginner's mind. If you have a mind that already knows, you can't learn anything. So, like I said a little earlier, we do the experiments, see if it works for us. And we have a wonderful little booklet that is really a core, it's the essence of Zen. It's called the Shin Shin Ming. And it's 25 stanzas in this little poem. And to say that it's the essence of Zen, there's got to be a lot packed in there. And I imagine it's something like a Christian would study scripture, because when I forget the doctor's name said that you have changed your understanding of scriptures on occasion. This little poem constantly gives me something to look at, to look with fresh eyes. And it's a lifetime of study of just this one little poem, 25 stanzas, that tells us about how our mind works, how we create suffering, and how we can be free from it.
Thank you very much. So our third question is, are there or have there been tension between members of your faith community and the scientific community? So I'm taking a step back and kind of looking at communities as a whole. And if there have been tensions, which subjects have these tensions arose out of, and what's like the most common? Professor Haarsma, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, so I mentioned one before, in that sometimes people outside the Christian tradition will use, specifically people who have no, who would profess atheism or a strong form of agnosticism might look at science and say, well, science is the opposite of faith, or science is reason and faith is irrationality. And I don't think that's accurate, but because the debate is sometimes framed that way, that can be a source of tension. Sometimes another possibility is sometimes a minority of people who are scientists or interested in science will use the results of science as it studies human behavior to imply that human behavior is entirely determined by natural causes and sort of promote a kind of a moral nihilism. And that can bring it in tension with Christian theology and other religious traditions. So those are two sort of ongoing perennial examples over the decades of where there has been tension, not necessarily between science and Christianity, but people who are definitely not Christians and want to use science as a way to attack Christians, and then sometimes Christians attack back in ways that are not productive.
Thank you very much. Leena, would you like to speak that question as well?
Sure. Bluntly, yes, there has been tension between members of my community, the Muslim community, and the scientific community. It can stem from many things. One of the topics that I can think about right now would be, I'm kind of blanking right now, but maybe a simpler example of this is if we talk about something like genetically modified organisms and things that we eat every day. Most of the food that we get in the grocery store, even the ones that are labeled organic, controversial opinion from me, sometimes have their roots as a product of genetic modifications. And sometimes people might say that's unnatural. It's not quote unquote organic, and it's not quote unquote what it is as is without any modification. But the rationale from a scientific point of view would be, you have to look at what gave rise to these companies coming up with genetically modified food in the first place. It was to solve a bigger crisis where you have not enough food, or the crops are not growing as well. And there's a rationale behind that. And one can argue that this rationale still has some moral value because we are trying to solve a food crisis. So that can be seen by some Muslims as, okay, it's actually a good thing because there is a moral intent in there that supports what we are supposed to do as part of being a better Muslim, to help community. So it's always different opinions and interpretations, that it all really depends on how critical you are and how you look at how it is that we're using science as a tool. And yes, there is conflict, there is tension, and I cannot exactly say one side is either wrong or right, because there has always also been some validity in the other argument, where sometimes science is used in the wrong way. Sometimes it is used to hurt others, and sometimes it is used to delude others into thinking maybe this result is correct, but actually it's not. But that may be because some data was not presented in the critical way or the most honest way when you're reading a paper. So that could be what causes people to create this distrust even amongst the Muslim community towards the community of scientists, especially those of us who are Muslim scientists and have to struggle between this divide. I think the best we can do from the scientist community is to be more clear and accurate in our way of presenting data, and following what we are taught from the teachings of Islam. And as the community of non-scientists who are Muslim, to try and be more critical about what it is that you're reading about this result. So it goes hand in hand, and both communities have to work together.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Yong Su, would you like to speak to that question as well?
Sure. In Buddhism, there is a wide range, I'm sure in Christianity too, but there's a wide range of opinions, and no one person speaks for all Buddhists. Even the Dalai Lama is a leader of Tibetan Buddhism, but he doesn't speak wholly for any Buddhists. But I know of no real conflicts between science and Buddhism. I'm sure some Buddhists have some conflicts with some, but I can't speak to any conflicts that, directly. I don't have any examples.
Absolutely, thank you very much. So our last question that we had prepared prior to this discussion was, have you seen any similarities and differences between how your faith and other faiths view science and religion? Professor Haarsma, would you like to speak to that question?
Yes, I'm most familiar with the monotheistic religions, where there's a lot of similarities in terms of seeing God, one God as a creator and sovereign. And so tends to be a lot of similarities in ways things are talked about. Usually the discussions are about how does science affect our understanding of sort of special revelation within the tradition, and how do we see an interplay between God's sovereignty and how much does God micromanage? Like, for example, this is another place where science can come in. Members of all the who talk about God being sovereign, some might be tempted to say, well, so disease is just, we shouldn't necessarily treat disease. We should just, trust that God made our bodies to heal us. Whereas that's kind of a minority view, at least in the Christian tradition. And most would say, no, science is a gift from God that helps us, heal people and help people, and we should make every use of it we can. So a lot of the debates and a lot of the common affirmations are there with Christianity and all the other monotheistic religions. In terms of other traditions, I'm a little less informed. I think Buddhism's emphasis on understanding suffering is certainly a point of connection in relieving suffering of people is something that, of course, Christianity cares a lot about as well. But I don't want to speak too far into my ignorance, so I'll stop my answer there.
Thank you very much. Leena, would you like to speak to that question as well?
Sure. I have pretty much a very similar view as Dr. Hauskamp. I think monotheist religions, from my personal view, I feel like there's a lot of similarities. But I think all religions in general teach, in some form or other, teach you to be a better human and teach you to act in a conscientious way towards others as well as the environment that you're in. And I think those basic principles are kind of why religion sort of exists in a way, is to give you some kind of an instruction manual in how to be. And I think even me, I can't really think about too many differences. I don't know too much to say enough about what would be very different other than the basic difference of monotheist religions and religions that are not monotheist, but that's as far as I can say. But I really do think that it really is about having a way of life, knowing personally how to live your life in the best way possible, in a conscientious way. And that's, I guess, what religion really is about.
Thank you very much. Yong Su, do you have any comments that can make on that question as well?
Yes, I think there's a lot of common ground. We live by a series of precepts, but the basic ones, which certainly wouldn't argue with the Ten Commandments, or the principles that we have, and the precepts are: we protect and respect all life. We respect and protect the property of others. We respect and protect kind, loving, appropriate speech. We protect and respect sexual boundaries, and we respect and protect ours and others' sobriety. So I don't think any religion would argue with that. Our difference is that we don't pray to a deity. We do not have a deity. We do not pray to Buddha. But this little hippie had a concept that God was everyone. To be quite frank, I got that using drugs. That concept came to a friend of mine and I, and that kind of went dormant for a while. But when I came to Buddhism, what we believe is that everyone has Buddha nature, that all of it is God in that sense. Most Buddhists wouldn't say that, but I do. That's my opinion. That's God. Everyone, everything, every last bit of it has Buddha nature. And what we see as not Buddha nature is just ignorance of not knowing what you really are, not expressing your divinity, and instead expressing something out of fear, which causes your suffering. So I think we're on pretty even ground on most of it, probably not on the deity part, but.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. If possible, we would just love to have a round of applause just for our speakers. Thank you for coming out. And now we would love to open up the floor for any questions for people that were online or in person as well.
So my name is Fisher. I'm in charge of marketing for the Science and Religion Forum. We're just going to open up the discussion to the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hands either on Teams or in person, and we will take your questions. Or if you'd rather, you can email us at cia@calvin.edu, and I will read your questions to the speaker. You can also put your questions in the chat in Teams as well.
So we have one question from the online audience, and it reads, do you have any particular examples of discoveries in science that affirmed or led you to better appreciate your faith?
Professor Haarsma, would you like to start that one?
Could I let some of our other guests go first for a change?
So yeah, actually, I can think of a particular example of science that really made me appreciate my faith. There's a lot of emphasis on respecting your mother in Islam, and how her love is very unconditional. And we even have I think there's a saying that says, heaven is underneath her feet. So it was more of a way to build a respecting relationship between the mother and child, and to see the value of the mother. But in science, I was actually reading a few things recently, and I learned that the mother's bones actually dissolve to form the baby's bones that's in the womb. And I see that as it's very fascinating. The process and the scientific part of it is very fascinating, but I also see that as one of the highest forms of unconditional love. So that really made me better appreciate the values I've been taught in Islam as a Muslim, and how to treat my mom, because her body helped make me, and I understand it better through science. So yeah, that's an example of that really made me appreciate my faith.
Thank you very much.
I didn't hear the question. I think I know it, but would you repeat it, please?
Yeah, so the question is, do you have any particular examples of discoveries in science that affirmed or led you to better appreciate your faith?
Well, I think some of the latest studies over the last several years on the mind and how it works and how it can change really folds right in with our practice of meditation. Meditation changes your life. That's my experience. And to get control of the mind is is an end to suffering. The mind is a great servant and a lousy master. And most of us, me including, let that master take charge way too often. And so it's interesting to see that, and I can't remember some of the articles I've read specifically, but seeing latest studies on science of mind and meditation is quite rewarding, quite good to see.
Thank you.
So my favorite example from my own life of faith is knowing from Christian theology how God works patiently with human beings in our own life over a long period of time to try and sanctify us and make us better. And then in the history of the world, Jesus started with a small number of disciples and then commissioned the church to grow through the actions of people. God apparently is willing to work patiently through his creatures to accomplish God's goals. Now in science, as I learned science, I learned how that was reflected in God's governance of the natural world. I was thrilled as a physicist to learn how the laws of gravity and nuclear fusion can work over, hundreds of millions, billions of years to form stars and planets, and how natural processes of mutation and natural selection and these other amazing mechanisms that God is using to make new species all the time. And God is apparently willing to work patiently through his creatures so often, including us. So what I learned by studying the natural world sort of reinforced what I learned in theology about how God is patient with us and willing to work with us.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat. In the middle of the pandemic, we have seen how religious faith leaders and scientific community have clashed in the fight for COVID. How do you think that we can improve that relationship in the future so that we can heal faster and keep our scientific and religious communities strong?
I can go first.
Thank you.
So this one it's a big one, and I know it's on everybody's mind. Personally, as a scientist, we read the literature, we score what's correct and what is an incorrect interpretation based on where the biases are and based on the sample size and based on the statistical analysis. And then you critically look at, is the conclusion the authors are making about what they've published true based on your individual separate interpretation of what you've just read. And from that point of view, there are papers that actually have a lot of good value, like for instance, the vitamin D studies that have come out in the past year, linking vitamin D as a potential useful target to treat COVID, and how vitamin D deficiency is linked to an increased risk for COVID. And there's also papers that focus more on practices like wearing the masks and the use of protective measures to protect people. And what happens here with the way I see why the divide exists is more to do with the in-between factors, where there might be some forces at play that make it more bureaucratic or make it feel like we have less of a choice in what we can and cannot do, or about the frustration with dealing with the new normal versus how life used to be. And that can sometimes be directed at the scientific community, because we are right now at the forefront trying to figure out a cure, trying to figure out what's the best way to deal with this disease. So I think the part of us or the community that might feel distrustful towards scientists because of having to deal with things that are unfair and unjust should also look at other factors at play that might have less to do with what the scientists are doing in the labs trying to figure out what's happening versus what powers are at play that might be taking advantage of the situation. And what we can do as a scientific community is to be more outspoken, to be more accurate with what we are putting out there, and to help other people who do not have the scientific training understand how the research is meant to be read and understood critically. So that's my piece.
Thank you. Professor Haarsma or Yong Su, would either of you like to?
Yes, so a good example, Francis Collins, the head of the National Institute of Health, is also a devout believing Christian. And not only has he been, for the last year and a half, really pushing good science and developing the scientific community to work on this, he has been also going publicly in various religious forums. I know the BioLogos organization has hosted a number of events where he, along with respected theologians and pastors, have gone on and along with many other religious leaders to urge believers to say, you know, love your neighbor by wearing your mask, love your neighbor by getting vaccinated, and really using the best parts of the Christian tradition to appeal to Christians to do what science is also indicating will help the most people. And that's been very helpful. We also have to know that, you know, early on with this pandemic, when we all of a sudden couldn't meet together in groups and had to stay distant and masked, you know, that affected religious services. And when you tell people you're not allowed to worship the way you've worshiped all your life, that can feel like an attack on one's faith, even if it was not intended that way. And that may be a source of some of the tension that's going on. So what religious leaders and scientific community alike can do is push the best sort of public health policies, but framed by appealing to the best parts of that tradition. Loving your neighbor. We're asking you to make sacrifices, but you're doing these sacrifices for the sake of loving your neighbor.
Thank you for that insight, Professor Haarsma. Yong Su, would you like to speak to that question as well? I think you're still muted.
I'll get used to this. So I can't speak for all of Buddhism, but I can speak for our temple. We're going through a process of trying to figure out how to reopen. And there's going to be some things. We respect all of our Sangha's opinions about vaccines or not, or even masks or not, but we have a responsibility in our temple that if you want to come, then you're going to have to wear a mask and socially distance. And we're going around with, we want to strongly encourage vaccination, but can we absolutely insist upon it? And we're not going to ask for, you know, vaccine cards at the door. But we would hope that, you know, people will honor that. And we'll see if we really butt heads with somebody. Health is going to have to, you know, take precedent over someone's personal opinion that masks are against their personal rights. So they can have that opinion, but they won't be allowed into the temple. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah.
So how do you answer questions about controversial topics such as evolution and creation? What are your own beliefs versus how do you think people can interpret that without compromising faith?
So I've written a lot about that. So I'll answer. So what I did personally is I started out by being aware that there was a range of views within Christian tradition, but when I was young, I didn't know too much about that range. So every time over the decades, when I encountered a topic where I said, what I'm learning from science doesn't quite fit with the interpretation of scripture I was raised with here, and evolution for a little while was an example like that. I said, okay, let me make sure I understand the science. Let me learn the science. Then let me learn where does sort of the science end and people adding sort of their own philosophical spin onto it start. So in this case, where does the science of evolution good and where is perhaps an atheistic interpretation added on? So learn the science, learn philosophy of science. But then I went running to the theologians and the biblical scholars, and I said, okay, help me out here. And I always learned again and again within the theological tradition of Christianity, there were plenty of resources to help me out. So every time there was conflict, I went to learn more science and philosophy of science, but I went to learn more from the experts in my religious tradition, from the theologians. And every time I did that, I always came away feeling there's no conflict here. In fact, I feel like I've learned it better, and I'm happier than when I started.
Thank you. Leena or Yong Su, would you like to answer that next?
I feel a little ill-informed and not fully prepared to take on the subject of abortion and creation. I do know that abortion is definitely a taboo in Islam. And I do know that there might be special circumstances. I don't want to quote anything here because I do not know enough. But there might be special circumstances, some gray areas where it might be viewed differently. I personally believe that what choice one makes with regards to this, from the point of view as a Muslim, is best made when you know your literature, when you understand what's written about it, and you understand the personal circumstance surrounding the decision you are trying to make. And at the end of the day, the one judgment that matters the most is God's, not anyone else's. And as long as you are mindful of that, I think that is the best way to go about it.
Thank you.
Could I hear the question again, please? I didn't.
Yeah, so the question was, if I'm remembering it correctly, what are your views on controversial issues like evolution and similar issues like that? Sorry, what was the other part of the question?
So how do they interpret it, and how do they interpret it in a way that it doesn't compromise their faith?
So how do you interpret issues like that, and how do you interpret them in a way that doesn't compromise your faith?
It's a very personal choice. I said the 5 precepts. We suggest you live by those. You're going to be a lot happier if you do. A very personal decision like abortion, that's got to be that's something that you have to work out for yourself. And there's no guiding principle that says you're bad if you do this, you're good if you do that. In that situation, there's so many variables that may come into play that Buddhism wouldn't say, this is the way you do it, and this is not the way you do it. Yeah, it's a very personal religion, and arguably just a philosophy to some.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the room or from the audience online?
Yeah, I have one. I think Professor Haarsma and Leena, you talked a little bit about this, particularly the tensions that we often find that it's really between faith communities with themselves on how they view science and faith, and whether that is intention or not. And Leena, you talked about how it's on the scientists to be more clear on what exactly they are proving with their science and being very clear so that the public as a whole has a better opportunity to actually take in that information. But with those two, kind of bring those two together, how can faith communities, or within each of your guys' faith communities, foster discussion to try to have them be more welcome and open to science, if in many ways they're very opposed and all the people around them are also opposed to seeing science and faith working together?
Could everyone hear that question clearly? Okay.
That was a very long way of asking it, so I apologize for that, but.
So yes, it takes a lot of years of very hard work to become a practicing professional scientist. And one of the things, unfortunately, that tends to get lost in that science education these days is very little philosophy of science. Most scientists know little or nothing about philosophy of science. And so, unfortunately, it's the case that some scientists, again, I'd say it's a minority of scientists, will use sort of a bad philosophy of science and misunderstandings of religion to attack religion. So it really is important for this, whenever that happens, for the rest of the scientific community to come alongside those scientists and say, okay, look, you've gone beyond the science here. And we do see that very often sometimes when scientists attack religion poorly in the name of science, other scientists who are not even religious will sort of come along and try and correct that. It doesn't always get the press. It doesn't always get the notice, right? Mm-hmm. The loud voices on the ends often get the attention. So yes, the scientific community within itself needs to work on that. And yes, within the Christian community, there certainly are many scholars who love science and try and present science very positively. But of course, not everybody who's a Christian needs to know science and learn science. So what can sort of the average person in the congregation who's not a scientist, mm-hmm. Who hears these debates and discussions going on do? And I guess my one advice would be, be slow to be slow to become angry, and, avoid bearing false witness. So if you hear something where it sounds like somebody is attacking your faith, don't immediately leap to a warfare mentality. Be calm and courteous and learn and listen. And if the first thing you do is attack someone who you think might have attacked you, it might turn out that you're bearing false witness if you do. So that's a principle that works in all of our lives and can certainly work in this particular situation where you might feel your faith tradition is being attacked. Mm-hmm.
I really like all the points that have been mentioned so far. I'll add that one of the ways in which we can bring these communities be more inviting, scientists being more inviting of non-scientists, and faith communities also the other way around, being more inviting to scientists, is we have to understand that it's about building trust. And trust is not something that is given, it's earned. So you have to work slowly, and you have to work persistently and intentionally. And you have to practice what you do, whatever you affiliate with, I'll use myself as an example. When I talk about Islam, or when I'm talking about Islam to someone who doesn't believe in Islam, or who doesn't believe in monotheist religion, or is an atheist, for example, it has to sound normal, and it has to sound inviting, and it has to sound like you're not part of a secluded group. The problem with being inviting is sometimes we don't realize, even as a scientist, it's our own little, almost like a cult, it's our own little thing. And sometimes if you're not careful and if you don't check your ego, you start to see other people who don't think of science in the scientific way or don't have the critical thinking, you start seeing them as less, or you start seeing yourself as superior without realizing it. And that also creates tension unconsciously. So being mindful of these things from both sides, if you are a religious scholar, knowing that just because you're knowledgeable about religion and you have a lot of knowledge about the philosophy and the theology behind it, doesn't mean others who don't have those views, particularly scientists who might be Muslims in my case, are wrong or are less knowledgeable. They might have a different type of knowledge. And the other way around, where when you're a scientist and you spend so many years researching something, and oftentimes like in your own little world, it's important to come out of that shell and important to see what else is around there, what other types of knowledge is around there, and understand that other people can also think critically and come at something in a more insightful way outside of the scientific perspective. So it really is upon each one of us as individuals to practice what we believe in and we are passionate about in an inviting way by being conscientious about how we present ourselves to others. And also understanding that trust is earned and it takes time. And that's the best thing I can say.
Thank you. Yong Su, would you like to answer that question as well?
I think, well, I've said it a little bit before. We try to keep an open beginner's mind and honor all views. But there's one saying in that Shin Ming that I talked about, that little poem about Zen. And it says, "Do not seek for the truth, only cease to cherish opinions." Now, that doesn't say you can't have an opinion, but the problem word there is cherish. When we start to get these opinions about whatever it is and we hold to them and we nurture them, and we can't see anything else. And so we need to be open and hear everything and then put it into our own discernment and come out for our truth for ourselves. And don't hold to that, because tomorrow something might change a little bit and you have some new info and you might have to change again. The only thing that's constant is change. And that's a basic Buddhist idea of impermanence. And so we try to be open and honor everybody's opinion. It doesn't mean that we don't discern that this is not right for me, but I don't discern much that's not right for you. That's it.
Thank you. With that, we're running a little bit short on time, so we're going to head into conclusions. So Sita will lead us into that.
I'm Sita. I'm the secretary intern for CIA. Thank you for everyone being here today, and thank you to our speakers once again. For everyone here in person, please make sure you scan the QR code and fill out our feedback survey. And if you haven't already, please fill out the attendance form. And for Calvin University faculty and staff, this event qualifies as a cultural competency professional development activity. So please go to register your participation in this event by visiting the Calvin Human Resources webpage.
Thank you so much, Sita. My name is Maggie Backus, and I'm the Communications Director for CIA. To conclude, we'd first like to thank everyone who helped make this event possible. For SCARF and CIA, we had support from a grant given by Bridging the Two Cultures of Science and Humanities to a project run by Scholarship in Christianity in Oxford, the UK subsidiary of the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, with funding by Templeton Religion Trust and the Blankenmeyer Foundation, the Department of Diversity and Inclusion at Calvin, as well as our Service Learning Center, and of course, our Calvin community. A big thanks to all of you, as well as the CIA mentors, Professors Dykstra Prime, Howard, and Van Leer, for all of the support they have given to our org. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite any audience members in person with an interest in participating in CIA or SCARF, or joining our mailing lists for more information, to come and speak with leaders after the event. We'd be happy to talk with you. And finally, a big thank you to all of our speakers today, both online and in person, as well as all audience members for attending. We hope to see you again at future events. Thank you.
Before we leave, can we take a group picture since there's not many people? Yeah. And we can take a picture. I can take the first one and someone can switch with me. Go ahead. Thank you for coming, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so much.
Can we move the camera?
Oh,
We can-
excellent. Well, no, we can move the camera. Yeah, yeah.
Hello. It was nice to meet everyone.
Maybe, yeah, you can stand right in front of the podium, Simon. All right, I think. Would someone want to?
I got it.
Oh,
But I can't.
thank you.
Well, I'm not trying to.
He was so quick to jump in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we can probably end the call. Yeah, I'm start recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Ramadan. Let me just take my pen before I leave.
I think so.
Great job, guys.
Hey, Ganesh, you can stop recording if you'd like. Thank you so much, Professor.
You're welcome.